Rip. Good
Hey,
afternoon.
yeah, good afternoon, X. How you doing?
I'm good. I thought that we might talk about Kylie Jenner no longer being a billionaire. I know that was something that was on your mind today. Is that
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean that's a big headline that's out. Apparently, she's only worth several hundred million instead of a billion. So, probably just a rounding error. But yeah, she was on the cover of Forbes magazine not that long ago, where they announced her the one of the youngest billionaires at the age of 22. So apparently, they may have to retract that magazine or the cover.
well, it breaks my heart. You always hate to hear that when somebody gets downgraded from a billionaire to a millionaire. You
That,
hope it goes the other way for people, but it
absolutely.
breaks. Well,
Yeah,
that takes me into the topic that I wanted to chat with you about, which is a lot of people are feeling vulnerable because of the pandemic. We're Previously we were 10 years into a bull market, unemployment was 3.5%, and feeling pretty good about things. Income was on the rise, and stocks were going well. And then all of a sudden we're at 15% unemployment. Stocks were down at some point 35%. Of course, they're back a bit from there. But a lot of people are feeling a little rocked and wondering, I'm guessing people are starting to wonder, how do I make sure that I'm not vulnerable next time this hits me? So I thought that might be interesting to discuss. There's elements of cash flow being at risk, investments being at risk. Those are probably the two main categories. What do you think is the most important place to start if somebody wanted to build, say, a financial fortress before the next one hits?
Yeah, I think the first place to start is looking at your cash and understanding, liquidity and what your liquidity needs are. That's, there's the expression cash is king, and there's a reason for it, is because when life happens, you're going to want to have some cash to fall back on. So that's always the first place I like to start with clients.
Interestingly, there was such a demand for cash in that first month of the pandemic that people were selling everything. And in a lot of cases, they started with the safest treasury bonds and high quality corporate bonds. People were selling everything to get cash, which drove the values of those assets down, which tells me people probably didn't have enough cash going into this thing.
Yeah, that seems like a reasonable conclusion.
How do you think about how much cash to hold? People always ask me that.
There's a few different ways to look at that, and there's rules of thumb in terms of, probably the most common one is 3 to 6 months of living expenses, and I think there's definitely some credibility with that. If I'm working with younger clients with incomes that are stable, I would probably defer back to more of the 3 months. But in addition to that, one of the things that I like to do is understand what are short-term spending goals. What are expenses that are coming up over the next 2 years or less, and also park that in cash as well. So I would say 3 months plus whatever extra spending goals, whether that's travel, new car, down payment, any other expense that's kind of outside the standard budget, monthly budget, and add that to the 3 months, and that's where I would start in terms of liquidity needs.
I think it's become more real for people that income can get cut or go away. That hasn't been a huge threat in our economy until recently. Does that change the way you think about planning with cash and other considerations?
Yeah, absolutely. I think if you're in that camp where you think that your income may be cut, also some clients I've been talking to are on incentive systems where bonuses may actually be more like a draw. So they may have to pay back some money if they don't get their sales back up to where they were forecasting it. So that is something that you want to be aware of, and you want to not take risk with that money. And there's different ways to do that, whether that's just parking extra cash in the savings account, or maybe redirecting contributions that may have been going into, say, the stock market into something that's very conservative. So even if the thought is that probably I'm going to be okay, expect income to be back up to where it was, but if it's not, we can hedge and have a place to go to that's not going to be as volatile as the stock market. I typically tell clients, you don't want to be put money in the stock market that you're going to need within, I would say 5 years at a minimum. I prefer 10 years. That just gives you a lot of runway to let the markets do what they're going to do. But if there's ever question in terms of needing cash liquidity, I don't want to be taking risk with that money.
I think another way to build a financial fortress, let's say, is to have enough flexibility in a budget to cut back as much as maybe 30%. I hadn't really thought about it quite like that before. But when you're looking at a budget, I think just important as making sure you have positive cash flow might be, if we really needed to cut back, can we point to those things right away so we could free up? If you have two incomes, you might need to free up 30 to 50% pretty quickly. Otherwise, you're going to chew into that cash reserve.
Yeah, that's a great point. And for a lot of clients, one of the starting points is look at the Amazon line item on their statements. I know a lot of clients that it's become so convenient that Amazon has been a huge part of their overall budget.
Yeah, speaking of billionaires who did not get downgraded to millionaires, I think Jeff Bezos is on that list. He's on the good list.
I think he's okay. We don't have to lose any sleep over Jeff's financial status.
I totally agree with you about the Amazon thing, and something I've been experimenting with friends and clients is taking away all the amazing things that Amazon did to make spending as easy as possible, actually taking that away on purpose. And the simplest way to do that, I've found, is to only make Amazon purchases on, say, the first of the month. So make your list, and I don't care what you put on that list, because there's only one day you're going to be able to actually hit go on the checkout cart, and that's on June 1st. And then you're going to have 30 days. So you're going to have to make some decisions. And you can see on that day just exactly how much you're about to spend. And it might cause you to rein it back in and reduce those late night purchases if you've had a few too many after watching some Netflix.
Yeah, I think Amazon would hate that idea. I mean, that's a horrible idea. You're basically killing the impulse of nature of people wanting to buy when they think of something. From a financial perspective, it makes a lot of sense. You probably wouldn't make half the purchases that you did if you made it once a month. But Bezos is not going to like that. This video may get banned.
I'm concerned about that. Obviously, debt is a huge part of overhead. If Amazon's the biggest part of spending, discretionary spending, debt's probably the biggest part of overhead. With interest rates at 0 to 3%, it's tough to justify paying off too much of that debt, but maybe we should give that stronger consideration, given that income is at more risk than it's been in the past.
Yeah, I mean, debt is one of those financially sensitive topics. We have, some people hate debt. I know there's some financial pundits out there that despise it. Pay it off as soon as you can, as much as you can, beans and rice, etc. But, for clients that are comfortable with debt, a lot of people have built a large amount of wealth, using debt and then do it in a smart way. And I think probably there's a happy medium there. I like to think of it from the standpoint of never borrow money when you need it, only borrow it when you don't. Which sounds a little bit counterintuitive, but the thought is that if you're borrowing because you literally have no cash, then you're probably not in the best financial position. But if you have enough assets to back up the debt and or cash, then you can justify it. And I think that's the key, is using debt wisely. And if you're using it to buy assets, and you can play that leverage game between what your borrowing costs are and what your rate of return is, within reason, then that can be a really successful strategy. So it just depends, like anything else. There's no one answer for everybody, but depending on your personal comfort level with cash and or your net worth, it can make a lot of sense to maintain it.
There are a lot of videos on YouTube with people concerned about the impending collapse of the dollar. Trillions of dollars printed, massive budget deficits. If we're going to talk about building a financial fortress, some people are going to want to hear about what if the dollar is no longer the world currency reserve. What if it loses its value rapidly? If that's a legitimate concern that somebody has, and they're going to sleep better if they've addressed that concern, what do you think are the top few tools in the toolkit that they should look at?
Yeah, there's a lot of really smart people, successful people talking about this exact topic. And one of the tools that is that comes up quite frequently in conversation is gold. And gold and other precious metals, right? Gold, silver, etc. But I think we have a little bit of feedback, but hopefully it clears up. I don't bet the farm on anything. If clients are concerned about that, then let's talk about it, and let's come about a solution. And maybe that's hedging with a small percentage in something like gold. I mean, there's typically, if you look back historically, if there is some sort of reset to the reserve currency, which has happened historically over time, no one's been the reserve currency forever. So it is a possibility. Now, whether it's a likely event, completely different story. That's where none of us have a crystal ball on that. But if we wanted to hedge for an event like that, gold might be one of those. Another tool would maybe for more of the technology savvy people out there might be cryptocurrency or items like Bitcoin, right? So that's one of the more common one, or at least the largest one that's out there. But again, I think it's all within reason. I don't think that it would be in someone's best interest to move everything over to any one of those assets, and probably maybe against their best interest to move a high percentage. Maybe I wouldn't probably recommend anything more than 5 to 10%, because what you're trying to do is you're trying to predict a black swan event, and black swan events are unpredictable by nature. Those are outliers. And so what we're trying to do is we're trying to help improve the likelihood or the probability of success for clients. And we can't bet on outliers and make that happen. So, I think we are in a position where we need to still stick with what is and what's working. And for those clients that have concern, we want to help them address that, but we want to do it within a reasonable, rational way.
Another way to look at reducing the risk of a catastrophic loss in the event of a currency collapse or something crazy like that is, what is the cost of insuring against that? To your point, if you put a large portion of your assets towards that insurance, whether you think that's in the form of gold or Bitcoin or something like that, and it never materializes, the cost could be extraordinary over a period of 20 or 30 years,
right?
Compared to investing in a traditional way. So
sure.
You got to consider that, although it's hard to estimate.
Well, there's different types of costs, right? I mean, if you think about if you're gonna go buy physical gold bullion, unless you're storing it in your house, which may not be the wisest thing to do, you're probably going to want to have a third party store that and hold that for you. There's going to be holding costs involved. If you use an IRA, because there are self-directed IRAs out there to where you can buy physical bullion and coins, and they'll hold it for you, but those are typically going to charge you more than your traditional custodians. And then there's the opportunity cost of if you're wrong, right? So if it, to your point, if it never materializes, how much have you given up versus if you had just, stayed in the market in more of the traditional liquid assets? So that's why, I don't think it's wise to make big bets on outlier type scenarios.
Any last thoughts on a financial fortress? What else would you put on in your financial fortress?
Yeah, the financial fortress, start early and revisit your plan often, right? It's the power of compounding. The earlier you can build out a plan, the more likely your success is going to be. So, if you're young professional just getting started, or just getting going with a family, there's no time like the present, right? If you're not on course to hitting your goals, you want to know about that sooner rather than later. There's just not as many tools in the toolbox to help if you're 5 years from retirement. So that would be my biggest advice is, have a plan and work it.
Thanks for the conversation, Rip. I'll talk to you next week.
All right. Sounds great. Have a good weekend.
You too.